Good morning. Welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Ms. Melissa Smislova. Please welcome INSA Vice President of Policy, Larry Hanover.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Coffee and Conversation. We're pleased to welcome one of our community's top leaders to the program. Before we begin, let me make a few housekeeping notes. First, we hope to make this as interactive as possible, so please submit your questions through the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. We have more than 350 attendees this morning, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions. Second, we're pleased to welcome members of the press to the call today. So as a reminder, this program is on the record. And finally, we could not deliver this kind of expert insight without the support of our partners. I'm pleased to welcome Elaine Duke, Specialist Executive for Deloitte, who will introduce this morning's speaker. Elaine, over to you.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Larry. And I'd like to, in return, thank INSA for hosting this morning's program and the tremendous work that you do in producing these vital conversations. Deloitte is focused with DHS on protecting America from domestic terrorism, foreign malign influence, and through data science, revolutionary intelligence analysis. In addition to federal, Deloitte is supporting state and local governments, including working with 45 states, several territories, and tribal governments. Now, onto the important business. It's my privilege to introduce today's speakers. Melissa Smislova is the Acting Undersecretary for Intelligence and Analysis at the Department of Homeland Security. In this capacity, she oversees DHS Intelligence Enterprise Readiness Divisions, as well as Intelligence Enterprise Mission Centers, which serve as the department's center of gravity for intelligence-driven integration of analysis and operations. Ms. Smislova also oversees all of the intelligence and analysis personnel embedded in the fusion centers and other strategic locations nationwide. Prior to her current role, she served as Deputy Undersecretary for Intelligence Enterprise Readiness, leading all intelligence support and enabling functions. Ms. Smislova has been an intelligence professional within the IC since 1985 and with DHS since 2004. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. And thank you, Melissa, for joining us this morning. I think we may need you to just press the button on your screen to activate your camera because we can't see you at the moment. Hopefully you've gotten that camera request.
There we go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So great. So thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to have this conversation. I thought what we do is talk a little bit about INA's roles in DHS and the intelligence community. Then we could review some of DHS's, some of INA's core missions like domestic and international terrorism, cyber, and the like. And then we can get more to some questions about sort of the business of INA, and we'll take some along the way. So let's just start with an overview. You've worked in the intelligence community for 35 years, and you've been at INA pretty much since its inception. So how has the organization evolved over the years and over your tenure?
That's a great question. It certainly has changed a great deal. When I started in the intelligence community, we had fairly well-defined adversaries. They were located all overseas. So I started actually at the National Photographic Interpretation Center, which at the time was run by CIA, and I studied Soviet Union tanks and armor units. I quickly moved to the study of North Korea, which I remained with for over 12 years, and I studied only North Korea's military. Again, a very specific, well-defined intelligence problem set. I did move into the Pentagon. I did that in the late 2000s to late 2000 to have a job that would be a little bit better suited for my life, a little bit less work, so to speak. But I was in the Pentagon, signed there in July 2001, in charge of specially classified materials. So obviously it was not a good move as far as time management since all I did was work after the attacks of 9/11, right? So I came to the department in 2004, and at that time, our job was pretty straightforward but complicated. It was very specifically to provide threat information to non-traditional partners, state, local, tribal, territorial, and the private sector partners. We were in a very dynamic threat environment with terrorist information being discovered daily with our brave service people overseas. We were capturing detainees, et cetera, and learning more about the terrorist plots against America. Our job was to advocate with the intelligence community for specifically downgrades, get the information that was required to state, local, tribal, territorial, private sector. It was also to educate those non-traditional consumers of intelligence about what was intelligence, what it was, what it wasn't, how you could task the system, what a collection requirement is,
Right.
what it isn't. Another large part of INA's job was clearing people, making sure that the right state and locals had appropriate security clearances, that they had access to the information.
Right.
So INA does manage the top secret system for the entire department. And one of our jobs too was to make sure that the secret systems were deployed into the states. So there was a lot of housekeeping or foundational work that was part of our beginning. It was a lot of education as to what intelligence is. And I am really proud of the work that we did and the accomplishments that we made. It was all brand new at the time, and today the intelligence community quickly provides tier lines of classified information that might be used for our non-traditional partners. They are part of our team. We are quite embedded in with the rest of the IC with that. And our state and local partners are very organized, and they have clearances, and they're savvy about intelligence, and all of that, INA contributed to.
Yeah. So a lot of progress over the years, both from
Yes,
DHS
a lot.
and on part of your partners. So so let's move to the present day. So in working with the intelligence community, what is INA's principal role in engaging the IC, and how does it differentiate itself from other IC entities that also address in some way threats to the homeland?
Sure. Like every intelligence organization, we have our own space or our lanes in the road and what we are expert at. Since we are authorized to operate inside the United States when it comes to national level intelligence issues, we do play a key role in domestic terrorism, in a foreign malign influence when our adversaries are working inside the United States to amplify or push certain narratives. That's our job. We also work closely with our component partners, specifically in the border or ICE. And so we are able to provide unique insights into issues such as transnational organized crime. So we are increasingly too providing insights into some economic security issues that, again, are issues we discover inside the United States. We have a large collection apparatus as well. We have over 120 intelligence officers that do work outside the National Capital Region. They are mostly aligned with fusion centers in the States, but they often have unique insights that they contribute to the intelligence community in the form of, intelligence reports like everyone else.
And what are the economic security issues that you're looking at?
So there may be investments by foreign nationals inside the United States that are agreements with states, and that they're not widely known maybe in the IC. We have some insight through our large, we're part of a very large and fascinating and hardworking department. And so access to the information from CBP, for example, on some trade issues that can provide us insight into some economic security issues as an analyst.
That makes sense. So I'm glad you brought up CBP, because I also wanted to ask about INA's relationship to other components in the department. So the head of INA serves as the chief intelligence officer of the Department of Homeland Security. So what is INA's role in coordinating the intelligence collection and analysis activities of DHS components like CBP and ICE and others? and also in facilitating collaboration between those organizations and the intelligence community?
It's all of the above. The role also includes setting standards. So the entire intelligence enterprise does adhere to the tradecraft standards established by the intelligence community. One of our key roles is to provide access to information for our intelligence enterprise colleagues, access to training from the IC, for example, or developments in tradecraft or sourcing or something like that. We do ensure that coordination of main intelligence has occurred so that we are speaking as much as we can with one voice, or that we understand what the differences might be between the enterprise. But we all, again, just like your original question, we have a shared mission and vision, but we also have our own specific missions and visions. So TSA, Office of Intelligence, obviously focused specifically on travel, aviation, right? Same with Coast Guard and CBP.
Right, okay. So I want to move on to some of the core missions that INA plays. And counterterrorism is probably the highest profile mission. And there's traditionally, you focus on international terrorism. Lately, of course, you've switched an emphasis to domestic extremism, given recent events. So back in February, Secretary Mayorkas wrote in a Washington Post column that domestic violent extremism poses the most lethal and persistent terrorism-related threat to our country today. So a significant shift from the days right after 9/11. So I'm going to kick off my questions on this topic with a question we've gotten from our audience from Charlie Allen, former Undersecretary for INA and longtime intelligence professional and senior intelligence advisor for INSA. So thank you, Charlie, for watching. And Charlie asks, could you explain INA's role and responsibilities in domestic terrorism vis-a-vis the FBI and other agencies that play a role on the issue?
Certainly. First, I'm honored to answer a question from Charlie Allen, since he is one of our founding fathers and did establish a great deal the role of that chief intelligence officer with the intelligence enterprise I described earlier. A lot of that was furthering Charlie's own personal vision for the department, which has proven to be very important. So we do play a role. It's similar to the role we played in the early days, and that INA is authorized and established and statutorily required to provide information to our state and local, tribal, territorial, and private sector partners in order to further their abilities to make decisions in the best interest of the safety of the United States. So it's an information sharing responsibility, as opposed to the Bureau, which does have a responsibility to investigate and to arrest and to stop or to mitigate direct plots or activities. So with domestic terrorism, it's the same. It's a warning role. It's a background role. It's who are the adversaries? What are their intentions? What are their intended targets? Do we have any insights on the tactics that those adversaries would use? That kind of information that can help you identify a plot and mitigate that plot, or respond to the plot, or to recover from the plot. So it's a broader responsibility, I would suggest, than the bureaus, which is very specific. Having said that, we work very closely with FBI. Sure. And that is a relationship I am very proud of. Over the last 18 years, we have become very close with the Bureau. So I know at the beginning, the early days, was a little bit of tension, but that really has been overcome by time. We do have a relationship with our partners in CIA and NCTC on understanding those intersections between the domestic terror groups and foreign adversaries. And there are a lot of intersections. Sure. Right? Just as in the early days with homegrown violent extremists, we have a role to discuss the homegrown violent extremists, in that we have that relationship with the state and locals, who often know the individuals who are committing those crimes, and so we have more insight potentially. But those individuals are inspired by foreign narratives, right?
So the INA role is really more in assessment and warning and sharing information rather than supporting investigations and operations like the
Correct.
Bureau.
And providing, again, that collection information. So the
Sure.
information that we do get from our state and local partners, that we get from our large and very competent and qualified intelligence officers that are across the United States outside of the NCR. Again, another one of Charlie Allen's initiatives that has proven to be very, very prescient and important.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let me ask you a question about those assessments and the warning capabilities. So back in March, at a hearing on the January 6th events by the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, you testified that INA would examine how it can provide more and better information to its partners on domestic extremism, and also assess what resources you need to address the threat of domestic violent extremism moving forward. So it's only a few months since then, I guess, but what resources have you determined you need? And how can you provide better insights on this threat to state and local partners?
Yes, great question. So we are aggressively working with our state and local partners to understand how they need their information, how we can better deliver their information, specifically talking about technological solutions. So we are working to deliver some kind of awareness on your phone, for example. Right now, our information is available on a platform through the unclassified internet, but it's a little bit cumbersome. So we're working to improve that platform, but then also figure out different ways to push information to our key customers, specifically when we believe it is, more important for them. When we look back on the events before January 6th, I would suggest if you look at the products that we put out before January 6th, the information is pretty impressive, and we did provide warning of sorts, but not a specific enough warning. And so how do we improve upon that? I mean, it clearly wasn't a success, but nor do I think it's appropriate to label it a complete failure, and that we had some of the pieces and parts. So how do we get that better? And part of our challenge, I think, is to get it into the hands of those that can use it in an easier format and in a much easier way. So we're exploring that. We also have dedicated a branch just to domestic terrorism. So we've increased the number of analysts that are working on the project. We set aside a group of our open source collectors to just focus on domestic terrorism. That's not the way they were organized before. We have improved our training, and we are working with our IC partners to better understand how we can train our open source collectors to become more proficient at that specific task. And then we are augmenting our analysts with mentors and guidance. So again, really pushing forward to better understand this adversary in the classic, in really the way any of us would do when we have a new adversary or a more lethal adversary, right?
Sure. Have those changes and the dedication of resources, have that been principally since January 6th? Because looking back even further, back in 2009, INA produced an assessment of the growth of right-wing extremism, but then withdrew it and largely stopped producing work on the topic in the face of political pressure. So how has INA's approach to the issue changed since 2009, I guess also up to January 6th, and then?
Yeah, we actually never stopped working domestic terrorism. The paper we released in 2009 was not well crafted, and so it was recalled for tradecraft reasons. The key judgments were always something we stood by, which I testified at the time that we did. So our response to that paper really was to level set and baseline our tradecraft across INA, which we did. And for the last several years, I do want to brag that we are really at the top of the intelligence community's assessments in tradecraft in the intelligence community. But it took some work. We really baselined and focused on improving tradecraft after the paper of 2009. We always continue to work domestic terrorism. We worked it inside INA. We've had embedded personnel with the Bureau in their domestic terrorism team. And we also studied that issue and wrote on it with NCTC, with our assignees and detailees to NCTC. What we didn't have was a dedicated branch inside our Counterterrorism Mission Center, and so that's been the shift. We've also increased the resources, again, taking them from inside INA. We have no new resources for this at present, and then focusing those collectors on domestic terrorism as it's now our #1 priority.
Right, and you now have some direction from the top too. That this
Correct,
is
right, and some support, support, I would say, right? Yeah, it's not an easy topic, and it is something that we are closely aligned with our civil rights, civil liberties, our privacy officials, our intel oversight branch, which we have inside INA, and our OGC partners, and that is a partnership I can't underscore enough how well that works and how that really has been essential in our making any progress in this area as well as any other area.
Good. No, I want to explore those privacy and civil liberties issues a little bit later. So we'll hold that thought, but I also want to go on some of your other core missions. International terrorism, of course, is still a core mission. And I mean, in the 20 years since 9/11 and the 16, 17 years since the department's was founded, the nation's implemented a wide range of measures to prevent a foreign terrorist attack in the United States. So we're a great deal safer now than we were way back then. But how does INA view this threat now? And which groups pose the greatest threat to the homeland in 2021? And in what ways do they pose threats?
Yeah, and our role with international terrorism, we obviously play quite closely with NCTC and our other IC partners, but we do have a specific responsibility with terrorist travel, with vetting, with understanding the movement of the terrorist groups, and the ones that pose the biggest threat are the similar ones we've been talking about for a while: ISIS, AQAP, Al-Qaeda still is a terrorist threat. But again, INA's responsibility with the homeland are the terrorists coming into the United States? Are they leaving? Our role in supporting the vetting operations of the Department of Homeland Security has really improved and grown over the years.
Okay. And that presumably draws a lot on INA's ability to coordinate resources from within the department, from CBP and from ICE about travel, from TSA about travel and the like.
Yes.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Let me talk about another mission about cyber. DHS as a whole plays a key role in protecting the United States from cyber threats, but there are multiple DHS organizations that support this effort, in particular CISA, which is a relatively new creation. So where does CISA's cyber mission end and INA's mission begin, or maybe vice versa? So to what extent is there redundancy in those mission sets, and whether that's planned or not, and sort of how do you coordinate with CISA on cyber threat?
Sure. So CISA is our newest agency, but it did grow from infrastructure protection, which, if you recall, was one organization with IA. So under the Homeland Security Act that creates the department, INA is created with infrastructure protection. We're one office, and we're not divided until that second stage review was church off. So in many ways, the CISA has been one of our closest partners since the beginning. Our intelligence office works with CISA. We're actually embedded physically with CISA. Most of the office works over there on Glebe Road with our CISA colleagues. We provide them the access to the intelligence from the intelligence community. We do our typical analytic role, and our responsibility there is to push the information out to non-traditional consumers of intelligence, as well as to the intelligence community. And that's a role we play more, I would suggest, in the cyberspace than we do in many of the other spaces, and that we play a critical role in analyzing not only what we understand about these adversaries from traditional intelligence collection, but what we pick up inside the United States which is often from our CISA colleagues. So it's a very close relationship. CISA's responsibility, though, is to protect the cyber infrastructure, to understand the threats against it, but specifically to protect it. And so we're analyzing the threats and the implications of the threats and maybe what the threat actor was aiming to achieve. And CISA is really working diligently to protect us and continue operations inside the United States to respond to threats.
Right. So again, similar to some of the issues we talked about already, INA's role is really the analysis and the warning and the information sharing, and then other organizations work externally to operationalize it, basically.
Yes.
Okay, makes sense. So let's talk about another issue too, where you're collaborating with others in the department, border security. So border security, particularly at the southern border, is a critical mission for the Department of Homeland Security. So how does INA support the Secretary and other DHS component organizations on this issue?
We are responsible then for understanding some of the factors behind the migration, understanding maybe what's going on in some of the countries of origin from the migrants, in working closely with our intelligence community partners to advocate for the departmental needs as far as intelligence requirements. So that's another one of our roles, is to be the advocate for the department inside the intelligence collection apparatus, right? So it's to be able to say the department needs information on Mexico or Guatemala, and then be able to articulate why. We also, though, assess migrant flows across the border. We may assess transnational organized crime activities inside the United States. So it's a complementary role with our Border Patrol and our ICE partners.
Okay. And one other mission I want to talk about, maybe this is something that's more informal. INA has a role, I guess, in combating misinformation on various threats. In that, INA is making its assessments public and sharing it with state and local partners. So does INA, what kind of role does INA play in combating misinformation about threats like foreign election interference, the actions of violent domestic groups, or other threats, just in getting the objective facts out there?
Sure. One of our roles is to understand foreign malign influence and understand which narratives foreign adversaries are enhancing or promulgating in order to spread divisiveness across the United States. And we will report on those and provide that information to our partners who may be able to use that information. We also hope that, especially with our work in domestic terrorism and international terrorism, in putting together products with our bureau partners, that we become more of the authoritative source of what those adversaries are intending to do. And so that's been one of the concepts behind our joint intelligence bulletins with our bureau partners, to provide that information, again, back to our customers, to say this is the government view based on all available information of what this threat is or could be. We published our Homeland Threat Assessment in 2020, and that does say it almost identically said that what our Secretary Mayorkas did in his statement that you read at the beginning of this conversation, in that the domestic terrorism threat is a persistent and lethal threat. And that publication was unclassified. So it's another way that we try to get our information out. Correct, right.
Yeah, putting that out unclassified is a great way to get the facts out.
And we're able to work with our other partners across the department to put things out, like the National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin, which is meant for the public. And so INA will write the threat portion of that, but it's combined with our policy colleagues, our CISA colleagues. Again, they came from infrastructure protection, so they still have a large role to play in protecting critical infrastructure. So they contribute to those bulletins as well.
Okay. Before we move on from the core missions, I just want to get to a couple of questions we had about domestic extremism. And we had two questions that address a point you made about looking at ties between domestic extremists and foreign terrorists. So we had a question from Jeff Selden asking about what ties you're finding between domestic violent extremist groups, especially white supremacists, and foreign extremists overseas, and a related question from Corey Ash about whether we're seeing a nexus between domestic terrorism and traditional overseas adversary governments.
Sure, and I would say yes to both. The specifics I'm not comfortable sharing here, but
Sure.
I would say that if you step back, and this is another development since I started my career in the intelligence community, is that really almost all threats are international now. We are just so closely tied with each other, and it's so easy. But some of these hostile and violent narratives are not unique to the United States, but they are unfortunately universal or global narratives. And so as we continue to explore and understand these different domestic groups that pose threats to the United States, we are finding that there are international ties. Again, the world is pretty small now compared to when I started my career.
Very true.
It's hard to drive. It's hard to put those boundaries on things anymore.
Right. Things don't stop at the water's edge so much
They
anymore,
don't.
especially
They
in a
don't.
globally wired world.
Right.
So Homeland Security takes a very different, it's
Right.
a very different definition than it was in 2001. Well, let's move on to some other issues that do affect how data is used inside the homeland, inside the United States. I want to touch on some privacy and civil liberties related issues. So on privacy, INA is really at the intersection of intelligence and law enforcement information, as we've discussed. And a lot of that touches in some way or another on US persons. So how does INA ensure that Americans' privacy and civil liberties are protected as you use that information for intelligence purposes and then share it widely?
Sure, we take this very seriously. Every INA employee is trained on the privacy, civil liberties, intelligence oversight, and our legal authorities. But we have the assistance of those experts every step of the way. If it's with data, we have very organized ways to make sure that our partners understand the data, that the data is protected, that our CRCL, privacy, Intel oversight, and our OGC partners have agreed and are part of the whole apparatus from the beginning.
Okay. So let me touch too about the use of certain kinds of information. So back in March, when you testified at the Senate, you noted that Secretary Mayorkas directed the department to make better use of publicly available information, particularly to inform analysis of extremist use of social media and other online platforms. So we have so I wanted to ask how INA makes use of that publicly available information for analysis and targeting and vetting. And also whether different rules govern your use of the information depending on whether you got it from a Google search, whether you purchased it from a commercial database, or whether you found it on social media.
The rules are the same. What we are doing, however, now is we are taking advantage of some of our external colleagues that understand the adversary and have been looking at these different groups on social media to augment our analysis. That's not unlike, what I did when I studied North Korea and I would refer to an academic journal. We are also trying to understand better how to use the social media in a responsible way. And it is a tricky space in that it is so dynamic. There is a lot that's said on social media that isn't, it's just said for no real purpose. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a plot or an intent to do someone harm. And so this is a case where we are very closely aligned with the experts inside the department that help us make sure that we are not infringing upon anyone's First Amendment speech. Sure. Make sure that whatever we're reporting on, because what we will do is we'll look on those sites. we can be tipped sometimes by information that we get from FBI or from another source that something is happening on the site. We'll look on the site. If we see information that suggests a threat or an attempt to do violence is available, we can report on it, just like we do in the intelligence community with an open source intelligence report. And then that report can be used in analysis. But all of that requires that oversight and investigation. Now, the department can use social media for a lot of different ways, and we as analysts are also learning how to use it. So, for example, if I have information that a protest is going to occur across the United States and that protest might be violent in nature, I can also turn to my FPS colleagues, Federal Protective Service colleagues, to ask, have permits been given to people across the United States? And again, it's a legitimate way to follow a threat topic or a story, but it's not a standard thing that analysts use. But we've learned in this case that's useful to say, yes, there were permits given. Yes, there are hotel rooms already booked. Yes, it looks like this event will occur. And then, do we have any information the event might be violent or not?
So it sounds like the real predicate or the real distinguishing factor is an assessment of whether an event is likely to involve violence, because otherwise you're looking at perhaps protected speech or even protected actions. I mean, going somewhere and booking a hotel room is protected unless you're doing it to show up at a place where you expect violence to be used.
Right. And that's where it is tricky, but it's a space that we are in, and we are working closely with all of our partners. And it's not the only source of information that we use in studying domestic terrorism.
Right. So one other question on the social media from Matt Levitt of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He asks whether DHS and INA in particular has sufficient legal authority to collect information on domestic violent extremism threats from social media. So do you feel like INA has the legal authorities needed in order to make use of the information that is there, that is relevant to violence, so that you don't look after the fact and say, well, that information was out there and we missed it?
That is what we believe at this time, that we have sufficient legal authorities, and we are proceeding cautiously but aggressively in this space so that we understand the threat and we provide that assistance to the country to keep us as safe as we can. We're working closely not just with our civil rights, civil liberties partners, but with our partners in policy and across the department and the intelligence community to understand what we can do to what kind of collection opportunities are available in the social media world, and maybe what opportunities are not, where we need to look or explore other avenues to understand the threat.
Right. Okay. One other question we have from the audience about information collected domestically from Nelson Imade. How can geospatial data be used to support DHS's mission, particularly in countering transnational criminal organizations and domestic terrorism, but potentially in other missions as well, like protecting national security special events and other things?
Right, and we do use geospatial information. Our partners at FEMA use it quite often with natural disasters. INA will represent FEMA whenever there is a natural disaster. We work with the intelligence community to make sure that the imagery necessary is provided or collected for our FEMA colleagues. We've used the imagery, obviously, with migrants, coming through different countries. It's not something that's as useful inside the United States, so I'm not really sure. I started my career as an imagery analyst, and I always want to look at the film, but it has its places, and then sometimes it has its shortcomings. So but we were close to this. Pardon me?
So within the United States, domestic imagery just isn't that productive. It's more imagery other places that might be the source of threats.
And there are numerous restrictions on what we can do inside the United States. And again, remember, we have partners throughout the United States, and so we get our insight from them, and it's your firsthand person. But it is used specific. most importantly, with our natural disaster responses, imagery can be
Right.
very useful.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let me ask a question again related to data that we have from, sorry, I've lost the name. I'll find that in a second, but on the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So how do you use AI and ML tools to make sense of the large amounts of data that you have coming in from different sources that might have different rules governing their use? And that question came in from Brooke Kaler.
Yeah, so we are on the forefront of understanding how we can use AI, especially in the cyberspace, with some of the information we collect from cyber adversaries, understanding the information that we get from the intelligence community, and then what we might have from our partners inside the United States that are giving us the cyber information. We don't use that capability with social media in the United States. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that we are not using any kind of artificial intelligence to look at social media in the United States, but we are interested in looking at it for some of our vetting requirements, or support to vetting, and our cyber foreign and malign influence space.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you a question about workforce issues, because INA has often had some challenges recruiting and retaining people. How have you managed the challenge of workforce retention and morale? How are you addressing it now? And then a related question that we got from the audience from Aaron Rosenthal, who's a graduate student at George Washington University, in recruiting analysts for different missions, such as domestic terrorism, international terrorism, cyber, are your criteria any different?
Sure. So I am proud to say we are fully staffed. In fact, we might be even a little bit overstaffed at present. We were able to continue to onboard and recruit even during the pandemic. INA was able to rely on that huge framework of the department with an unclassified capability that was not present in many of our IC colleagues. So we, a few years ago, I would say maybe 7 or 8 years ago, under Undersecretary Frank Taylor, really pivoted our hiring to entry-level employees. So not unlike when I showed up in the intelligence community right out of college as a GS7, we've taken the same approach inside INA. We have a robust internship program. We get thousands of applications, and we have around 40 interns a year. We convert almost all of them, and the ones we don't end up converting tend to go to FBI, but that's all good. We do hire 7s and 9s. We train them to be Homeland intelligence professionals. Okay. So some of the recent press reports that said, we're comprised of people from all over the community, those are just not true at all. Okay. That was true when I showed up in 2004. We were 75% contractors. I had moved over, as a GS15 from DIA. Everyone had come from somewhere. We were created from nothing, but that hasn't been true for over a decade. And now we are almost all federal employees. We are Homeland intelligence professionals. We are proud to say we're part of DHS first, and then part of the intelligence community second.
Right, good.
That's the goal.
So since you mentioned industry, we have a few minutes left. Let me ask a question about contractors. Sure. So contractors support INA in analysis, in data science, software development, IT support, many other missions. How do you see INA working with industry in the future?
Sure. So contractors have been a big part of our history. In the early days, again, the contractors sat side by side with us and did all of the same jobs that federal employees would do. As we have matured, we really rely on our contractors for some of that more specialized work, specifically with data science. INA is responsible for information sharing for the department, and part of our role is making sure that that vast amount of data that is collected collected inside the department is available for use in intelligence. And we, again, rely very heavily on a variety of contractors to provide us that specialized, specific support. But we also have contractors that help us. One of the things we're doing, even with our push towards better tradecraft in the social media space, is call in contractors that have that expertise from elsewhere and more seasoned senior people that can come in and assist us in mentoring our own employees. So I would say it's a variety of things, more increasingly the technology fields, but there's room for contract support across the board.
In addition to data science, are there other particular specialties that you see turning to contractors for?
We have recently really focused on enhancing our foundations across INA, and we've relied on contractors to help us with our budget processes, with understanding better ways to make our budget and other functions, more efficient, coming up with some organizational ideas for us to enhance our efficiency, our collection, things like that. Yep.
Right. Okay. And one related question, and then that'll probably be our last one because we're running out of time. A question about small businesses. So for a long time, larger companies secured many of the contracts with INA. Has INA also worked with small businesses and minority-owned firms? And then a question from Gentry Lane related, do you have a way to connect with small businesses who already have some sort of intelligence experience?
Yeah, so I am proud to say that we have matured our contracting procedures over the years. That's in large part due to the department's headquarters. INA we don't have our own contracting firm. We go with the headquarters, but they have established our contracting vehicles so that we're required to take a certain number of small businesses and minority-owned firms into consideration for our contracts, which is, in my view, great and certainly something we all support. Veteran-owned organizations as well, as we continue to support them.
Is there a particular office within the acquisition team that small businesses need to focus on, or they just work with the procurement office?
They just have to work through the big office.
Yeah. Okay, good. No, I know INSA has found that working with small and minority-owned businesses and veteran-owned businesses has added a lot of diverse perspectives. In fact, we have an event coming.
I love small business. Yeah.
Bring them in. Well, I think that really covers all of our time. Thank you, Melissa, for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
This morning. We really appreciate your candor and your willingness to share your insights. And we wish you all the best of luck in working on a really wide range of critical missions. So thank you. And we hope to keep you engaged with INSA and see you in the future.
Thank you. Thanks to INSA and thanks to all of your partners. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for watching online. And thank you as well to Deloitte for supporting this event. Without Deloitte's support, we would not have been able to make this event possible. So just before wrapping up, looking ahead, we have a jam-packed calendar for June. On June 8th and 9th, INSA will host its inaugural 8A National Security Showcase, touching on some of the issues we just wrapped up the discussion with. On each day of the virtual program, we'll see a dozen 8A companies presenting brief capability overviews of their innovative national security technologies, applications, and services to key public sector decision makers and potential private sector partners. This is a terrific opportunity to learn about some truly game-changing technology being developed by these small minority-owned businesses. A flyer with more information can be found in the document library on the right side of your screen, and more information is on INSA's website. On Tuesday, June 15th, INSA's Foundation will host a conversation about technologies that enable a secure remote hybrid work environment. We'll hear from Marie Falkowski, Chief of Digital Innovation at CIA's Weapons and Counterproliferation Mission Center, and from Dr. Elaine Niewood, Vice President for Intelligence and Cross-Cutting Capabilities at MITRE. This is the final episode of our three-part series on the future of the IC workforce, produced in partnership with clearancejobs.com and underwritten by Avantis Federal. Then on June 16th, we'll host a leadership luncheon with NRO Director Christopher Scalise. Moderated by INSA Chairman Tish Long, the conversation will touch on current priorities, how the agency plans to continue advancing space technology, workforce development, and opportunities for collaboration with the private sector. On Tuesday, June 22, we'll host Sue Calwait, NGA's Senior Associate for Culture and Leader Excellence, for a morning coffee and conversation. And then the following day, on Wednesday, June 23, we host Major General Michelle McGuinness of Australia, who serves as DIA's Deputy Director for Commonwealth Integration. She'll discuss a range of DIA priorities, most notably the agency's collaboration with Five Eyes partners. And finally, on June 24th, we'll hold a discussion about the challenges and opportunities of remote work and the national security mission. We have many more events coming up this summer, so look for more announcements in the days ahead. You can find the full lineup of our virtual events at insaonline.org. When the webinar ends, you'll see a short survey pop up on your screen. Please take a minute to answer the survey questions, as we value your feedback and use it to improve future INSA events. This concludes today's program. Stay safe and healthy, and have a good afternoon.